for it now.
Why?
It's the way it's supposed to be.
Review series where we bring fans and creators together. Now, I have been a huge horror fan my entire life, as long as I can remember. I am so excited to speak to our guest, Greg Nicotero, today. But while I've got plenty of questions for Greg, we really want to hear yours. So if you want to join, ask us a question live on video, you can hit that raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. Or if you'd prefer a text question, you can hit the question mark at the bottom of the screen. Now, I want to mention our charity partner for Hey Fandom, who is Direct Relief. Direct Relief is working globally to provide protective equipment and essential medical items to health workers who are responding to COVID-19. Really wonderful organization. And if you'd like to donate, you can do so at fandom.link/donate. All right, let us get to our guests. If you love horror movies, then you should love the work of Greg Nicotero. Day of the Dead, Evil Dead 2, Scream, so much more. This guy has worked on Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers, and Leatherface movies. On the non-horror side, he's done everything from Kill Bill to Casino Royale to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the last of which won him an Academy Award. And, of course, for the past 10 years, he's been a massive part of The Walking Dead, where he's an executive producer, special makeup effects supervisor, and the primary director. He's done over 30 episodes so far as director. On top of all of that, he is now the executive producer of Shudder's horror anthology series Creepshow, and directed 2 episodes of that. That show premiered last fall, but it is now hitting Blu-ray and DVD on June 2nd. Honestly, I could spend an hour naming this guy's amazing credits, but you know what? Let's bring him up instead. Greg Nicotero, I would like to welcome you to Hey Fandom.
Thank you. Thank you. Really happy to be here. Very happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much. We are very happy to have you here. First things first, though, we had some trivia about you, I know, before you came on. It seems like we might have had something wrong, right? We might have been off.
Well, I'm not sure, but okay. So in The Walking Dead, there's a lot of discussion about who the most efficient killer is.
Yeah.
And I remember pointing out to somebody that in the season 5 premiere, when Carol attacked Terminus and saved Glenn and Daryl and Rick, she blew up the propane tank and let all the zombies in, killed everybody in Terminus, which I think we had estimated at about 120 people. So in one fell swoop, Carol killed as many people as Negan has killed so far. So I'm very curious if Carol's proficiency was taken into consideration when that fact was researched.
That's very true. That's very true. We should look that up again. And Carol might take this one, and there's still room for it to keep changing places. So we'll see. Right.
Which would be interesting if Carol was actually better at killing than Negan was. I'd be very curious.
You never know. Carol surprised us a lot. She surprised us a lot.
That's
now,
right.
Let me start out asking you about Creepshow. The original film had this amazing pedigree, written by Stephen King, directed by the late, great George Romero. You had this amazing history with George, which began professionally with Day of the Dead. So when did the idea of bringing Creepshow back in this manner first come to you, and how long did it take to actually happen?
Well, it's very interesting. You know, I'm very much about things lining up and this weird twist of fate. You know, the fact that my uncle was an actor in The Crazies, which is how I segued into meeting George. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and you know, all these weird things kind of miraculously lined up to me meeting George and then becoming friends with Tom Savini, and that's how I got into the business. In terms of Creepshow, I was in Australia doing some publicity for The Walking Dead, and I was getting ready to get on a plane to fly back, and I'm like, man, I got a long flight ahead of me. I'd love to read something. So I go on iBooks. I find a book called Nights of the Living Dead. I'm like, that's interesting. What is that? Turns out it's a series of short stories that all take place the same night as Night of the Living Dead. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. So I bought the book. There was a story from Joe Lansdale. There was a couple, a lot of really fun stories in it, but one of them happened to be written by a guy named Craig Engler. And I fell in love with the story. And I came back to LA. I had a conversation with Brian Whitten, who's my producing partner. And I said, I don't know what the hell we're going to do with this story, but I want to option it because I want to shoot it as a short just for fun because it was really interesting. Cut to, oh, well, Craig happens to work at AMC for Shudder, which I'm like, wait a minute, my AMC? Like, we work for the same company. And lo and behold, his producing partner, Stan Spry, said, hey, it's interesting that you would reach out because we're in the process of trying to secure the rights to remake Creepshow. So I partnered with them, took the project right to AMC because I have a first look deal with them. And the next thing you know, they greenlit the show. So it was one of those like weird kind of Hollywood stories where everybody was kind of circling each other just close enough that it all came together. And I felt really, for me specifically, because Creepshow was when I really got to know George and when I got to be friends with Tom, I visited the set of the original movie. Wow. So for me to be able to continue George's legacy for somebody who did so much for me and so much for people, I felt like it was something that was kind of destined to happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to start including some fan questions in a little bit. If you have one, you can hit the raise hand icon if you want to do video, or if you prefer text, you can hit the question mark. Let me ask, though, you have a lot of fun writers and directors on this series, yourself included, adapting a lot of different short stories. There's some original ones, too. So how did you go about, once you were moving forward, how did you go about both finding the stories you wanted to adapt and then getting the collection together of the talent who was going to adapt them?
Well, I'll tell you, I feel like through the course of my career, I've been a big fan of short fiction, like published short fiction. So Joe Lansdale, David J. Scow, there's a writer named John Esposito. These are all guys who I have met at some point or another in my career and have been admirers of their work. So as soon as Creepshow happened, I reached out to a lot of these guys. I reached out, of course, to Stephen King and said, listen, it can't be Creepshow without a Stephen King story. So what do you think? And he, responded immediately with absolutely. So I spent probably 2.5 to 3 months reading all these amazing stories. I had never met Josh Malerman before, but Bird Box was about to come out or had just come out. And so I felt like I had a good opportunity to not only work with some veterans that I knew, but also to meet a whole new generation of writers like Paul Dini and Steve Langford, like Philip de Blasi and Byron Willinger, a lot of these guys. So I feel really lucky. And of course, Rob Schaub, who I knew from literally like the Sarah Silverman show. We had done a couple sort of outrageous gags together. And I think Rob was probably about this far behind me in terms of his level of excitement and enthusiasm. Like he probably drove to the shop every day for a week when we decided we were going to do Creepshow because he was so excited about being a part of it. So
Right. Understandable. I want to throw in a fan question here. We have a text question from Joseph. So let us bring up Joseph's question. Is there any chance that Stephen King's story Survivor Type gets adapted for an episode of Creepshow? I think we know Joseph's preference here, his fandom here.
Well, what's interesting is that was the story that Steve originally gave us. He said, I have the perfect story. It's called Survivor Type, and, it's yours. So I read the short story. I remember reading it. It was in different seasons, I think. And I had read it a long time ago, but it's basically about a guy who's stranded on a desert island that's the size of a small parking lot and breaks his ankle, and he's a physician. He has to cut his foot off. And then in order to survive, he's got to cut part of it, and it just kind of goes up and up and up. So I wrote the script for it because I was going to direct it. And when I finished it, I was really proud of it. I loved the script. I was super happy with it. At one point, I even had this fantasy of like, listen, what if we could get David Cronenberg to direct it? Because it's got that Cronenberg vibe to it.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, story by Stephen King, script by me, directed by David Cronenberg. I had very lofty visions. But when we got into production, the reality was it was a very small budget show. It was, things were tight, and we were trying to figure out like, well, how are we going to create this? Are we going to like build an island and put a bunch of blue screens around and have to comp in the ocean? I mean, I would want to do it real. I'd want to go to a real island. Mm-hmm. And the reality of actually being able to do that was just never going to happen. So I reached out to Steve and said, listen, I'm a big fan of Gray Matter. How would you feel about us adapting Gray Matter? Because Survivor Type might be just out of reach of what we're able to do. And he was fine with it. But, the script that I wrote, I'm super proud of it, and I had a great time doing it. And, I haven't written a ton of stuff. A lot of people are like, oh, you do everything. You're a producer, you do effects, you're a director, you're EP. So to be able to get a chance to develop something written by Stephen King was a huge compliment to me, and I had a great time.
Yeah, I always wonder how you handle time management, because it seems like you're doing so much. And just with the 2 TV series, I mean, obviously Walking Dead has downtime between seasons, but you're prepping an entire new show with Creepshow. Yeah. So how much overlap was there, and how exhausting did it get juggling it all?
There was, listen, I'll be honest, it was, I had no idea what I was getting myself into when we started Creepshow, because I'd spent 10 years on Walking Dead, where we have, the same sets, the same actors for the most point. It's not an anthology. You have standing sets, you have series regulars. When you're doing anthology, every 3.5 days we were creating a new universe. We needed new sets, new writers, new director, new actors. And I hadn't taken that massive challenge into consideration when we started doing Creepshow. I was like, oh yeah, it's Creepshow. Come on, how hard can it be? It was really challenging and really difficult. And there were a lot of really hard days when I went, what was I thinking? Because of course I knew the pressure of like maintaining the pedigree was everyone was going to watch Creepshow and compare it to the original. And if I didn't deliver, then I would have in some capacity soured, the legacy of George Romero. So I really felt like I had a lot riding on it, and I put everything I could into it. And that's the biggest compliment, is everybody that watches Creepshow, people that really liked it, they saw the heart in it and the blood, sweat, and tears that we all put into it. And that was the greatest compliment to me. Mm-hmm, so I was really grateful that the fans went, yeah, man, it captures the spirit. It's got a little nostalgia to it. It's fun. I wanted it to be a little outrageous, and some stories, they're all over the place, which is great, because one story is really funny, like The Finger, which was one of my favorites. That David Scow wrote, that I directed. I mean, it's so different than anything I'd ever done, with DJ Qualls talking to the camera. And yeah, I love that. And then then the next one is, completely different. Then you have, werewolves and Nazis. And the thing that Creepshow succeeds at is that it really, every single story gives you a different experience and takes you on a different journey. And they're all fun. That's the important part about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Reminder, if you want to ask a question, you can do the raise hand icon for video. If you have a text question mark. And I know we have another text question from Naruto. I'm very curious if that's his real name or not. What happened to the people from Grundy? I think he meant Grady Hospital. Will we ever see them again, or are they dead? Grady Hospital on Walking Dead.
We're talking about the season.
I think we're going.
Wait, that was the Beth episode.
Yeah.
Grady Memorial.
Season 5, I believe.
I think it must have been mid-season 5. Yeah, it's a little challenging. No, it would have been season 4.
Oh, 4,
because Middle of season 4 is when the governor attacked the prison. Everybody got separated. It might have been beginning of season 5. Anyway, because they went from the church. Yes. Season 507. Episode 507. Yeah, they're dead. All that for just, yeah, they're dead.
At this point, I mean, because the show's been on so long, and you have those little nooks and crannies of things. Is it funny for you to ponder those roads and wonder? Obviously you see what the writers are coming up with, but do you think, oh, it'd be funny to revisit that little corner of Walking Dead at some point?
Well, yeah, obviously, a lot of the episodes that I got to direct, we revisited certain moments. When Rick's last episode, we got to revisit scenes from episode 1 in season 1, and we had Herschel, and even I want to say it was episode 801, maybe, yeah, 801 with when we recreated the gas station with Carl.
Right.
There's been a lot of really fun opportunities to revisit stuff that we had done. I mean, we've been doing it for 10 years. So even with me, we're talking about putting sort of like a Walking Dead, like making of zombie book together. So I've been going through a bunch of pictures because I have thousands and thousands of photos, and there's a lot of stuff. We did so much work on this show over the last 10 years that you see on screen for 10, 15 seconds. So to get a chance to sometimes go back and revisit some of the characters and the scenarios and the creatures that we've done. Yeah, I love the idea. It's fun for us too, because we remember, I talked to someone yesterday who's just started watching the show, and she was like, "Why did you have to kill Shane?" And I was like, "Holy crap. If you're mad at me for Shane, you're not going to speak to me when you get about to season maybe 701, probably. I don't think you're going to talk to me anymore."
Right. It's going to be a rough ride for them.
Yeah.
We're going to take our first video question here. We have a video question from Jay. So, Jay, let's bring you up. How's it going for you, Jay? Thanks for joining us.
Everything's going good.
Hey, man.
Hey, so first off, big fan of the show of The Walking Dead. Really big fan as a fan and an actor. So I want to ask, so in a recent article, it talked about how you were originally going to kill Negan off in the season 8 finale, which was ultimately scrapped. So my question is, are there any other characters that you and the creative team were considering killing off that are still alive in the show?
Well, listen, let me clarify that a little bit, because that article, I was actually talking about the fact that I had sort of pitched to Scott Gimple, like, come on, we should kill Negan because it would be the perfect foil for Maggie. I was really the one that had felt that was would be a smart next step for the show. But of course, I wasn't thinking about, Alpha and the comic book and all these other things. I was just, at that moment, we had spent 2 entire seasons watching Rick and Negan fight. And I was like, oh, hey, if we want to divert from the source material, we could, maybe we kill Negan. So it wasn't in the plans in terms of the story. That was something that I had kind of said, hey, what do we think about this? Because, or even I think the conversation started, which was, I wanted Negan to shoot, I wanted Maggie to shoot Negan. Even if she didn't kill him, she had shot him. So, a lot of times we have these discussions. I would say the heads on the spikes was a really big conversation, because in the comic book, Ezekiel and Rosita's heads were on the spikes. So when we were getting closer and closer to that particular episode, there were a lot of the actors going, I don't know, it might be me. The comic book says it's me. I think Christian thought she was going to go. I think Kari thought he was going to go. Like, at the beginning of the season, like, that's been fun. Take care. I'll see you later. My head's going to be on a spike. So to be able to change that stuff up a little bit, I mean, I don't think we ever wanted to do like just a shot for shot remake of the comic book, because we know that we want to keep the material, somewhat organic. But, I know that when we were getting down to the heads on spikes, there was a lot of discussion there as to whose heads were going to go up.
Well, thank you so much, Jay.
No
Thanks,
problem.
man.
Thanks a lot. Let me ask you, Greg, that obviously we have this situation now where unfortunately you haven't been able to air your season finale yet. It has been shot, but with our current situation, we're unable to do all the work to get it finished. Anything you can say to sort of tease that? We left off on a big note. Norman Reedus has talked about quite a big battle that's in store. So what would you say for people that are waiting to see what happens next?
Well, it's one of my favorite episodes of the season. What's great about our show is, and what Angela has done so well is really sort of kept the momentum of the story moving forward. So, where we last left everyone was that, Beta and the Horde was surrounding the tower. And, the finale picks up right where we left off. And, our group is now having to deal with this giant, massive thousands of zombies surrounding their, where they're safe. But, we wrapped up there's a lot of character storylines that are, you get little bits of information here, and then you want to end that chapter and then start the next chapter in the finale. So we address lots of stuff with Dale, lots of stuff with Negan, lots of stuff with Beta, lots of stuff with Carol. I think it's already been revealed that Maggie's return is in the finale, and it tees us up so well for season 11 that it's a little agonizing for me to not be able to talk about it, because the last 2 minutes of the finale are gonna just, people's jaws are gonna drop.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think I forgot to mention that you directed this finale. So you've directed some huge episodes in the past, of course, but it sounds like, look, it's the season 10 finale. A lot's going on. Did this feel scope-wise like one of the larger episodes you've directed?
Well, there's never a small episode of The Walking Dead, ever. I mean, that we're constantly making sure that we don't repeat things that we've done in the past. And if we're going to enter into similar territory, we got to make it bigger, or we got to make it a little different so the audience doesn't feel like, oh, they did that in, season 5, episode 1 or whatever. So there's always that challenge of really just pushing the visuals and pushing the story and pushing the emotion. And, it's going to be interesting when we do get back to work, because we'd probably be in the middle of shooting the 3rd episode.
Wow.
So we're going to probably shoot in the wintertime for the first time ever on The Walking Dead, because I think by the time we get rolling, it'll be a little bit later in the year, so it won't be 110 degrees out. We'll actually have some cold weather instead of faking it by doing all the fake snow that we did in the season 10 finale.
We have another video question. Bring up Dara. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Dara, how's it going? Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, it's Dara. I'm doing
Dara.
great.
So sorry.
Hi.
It's all right. Hi, Greg. It's an honor.
Oh, thanks. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. I love the first season of Creepshow, and I was wondering if you had a favorite segment of the season.
Well, I love them all equally because they're so different. Mm-hmm. I had said earlier, I really did love shooting the finger episode, because that was the first story that we read when we were developing the series. That was the first short story that I read, and I said to the team, I want to direct this one. So designing Bob and building Bob and having it's like, I have 2 dogs, so I kind of was like, oh, if one of my dogs would go off and kill somebody that did something bad to me, that'd be kind of fun. So I loved, I wrote the story for Lydia Lane's Better Half. They're all fun. The Companion was the first episode that we actually filmed. And I think David Bruckner did a really good job of like making it scary, and it just had a really good vibe to it. So I love them all in there. It's like, because I was so close to all of them, I'm really proud of the show and what everybody did. And I will say that, we have all the scripts ready. We were one day away from shooting season 2.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
When this giant pause button came and they pushed the pause. And I think I like the stories for season 2 even better.
Oh, that's exciting.
I'm directing a couple more episodes, and I sort of use the gauge of, like, if I read a story and I was like, oh, I really see it in my head and I want to direct that one. There's a lot of the stories that I love, and it's just that it's so much fun. The scripts, I think we took everything that we learned in season 1 about, like, maybe we can even push it and they can be even more outrageous and more fun, and some of them can be a little funnier and some of them can be a little scarier. So season 2 is going to be bigger and better.
Can't wait. Thank you for bringing anthology. I love anthology horror, and I'm so glad to have it back in the forefront.
Thank you. I'm really proud. We were one of the first ones, and now everybody's following suit. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Thanks a lot. Oh, cut her off. I'm so sorry. Thank her again. I want to go to a clip in a second, Greg. We're going to talk about Creepshow a little more. I did also want to remind folks, though, of our great charity partner for Hey Fandom, which is Direct Relief. You can donate to Direct Relief by going to fandom.link/donate. Would really appreciate it if you're able to give anything. They're a really great organization. All right, Greg, we are going to dig into a clip from Creepshow. It's a spoilery one, but I wanted to get to the good stuff. It's from Gray Matter, the first segment of the first episode, and is directed, of course, by you. So let us check out that clip from Creepshow.
Richie, get out here. You're under arrest. Richie, get out here now.
So let's let's talk about, first of all, about the actors in that scene, because you've got Jigsaw himself, horror icon Tobin Bell, then you've got the amazing Giancarlo Esposito, who's just a bit busy these days with Mandalorian and Better Call Saul. But it just didn't seem like people were very ready to play in this world when you said, "Hey, do you want to come do a Creepshow segment?"
Absolutely. I mean, I'm grateful to all the amazing actors that I had worked with in the past, because, it's different when you have a character that will shoot over 3 days. So you're not really asking for, like, listen, I need 6 months and I need this. And, you're saying, hey, fly to Georgia, have some fun. It'll be great. It's only a couple of days. And, Giancarlo, I've known because I designed his Gus Fring makeup from Breaking Bad. So that's where he and I had met. Tobin and I had met probably, 15, 16 years ago. So I was really honored that when we would reach out, they're like, yeah, it sounds great. Let us know, when do you want me to be there? And, it's funny because both of the guys, we know kind of our experience that it was going to be crazy and strange and outrageous and just visually kind of stunning. And when we got to set and they walked into Richie's apartment which was a little homage to Jordy Verrill from the original Creepshow, because it's got all the moss and all the mold growing everywhere. You know, they both said to me, like, listen, we don't have to try that hard because this set looks amazing. You know, Amy Holmberg, our production designer. So we were able to really create an environment. And in this day and age, when so many people are working on green screen and, you know, you just step into a room, and, you know, Mandalorian's actually really breaking ground because that, you know, they have the volume, and they have, you know, anybody that hasn't seen like the behind the scenes of like the LED screens where they project the real-time backgrounds, it's absolutely brilliant. So we're on the other end of the spectrum. You know, we build little sets, and, you know, the guys run around, and there's a guy in a monster suit, and we put slime on him, and but they, you know, they were so excited about it. You know, David Arquette, even, you know, Adrienne Barbeau, like I had met Adrienne a long time ago, and when Creepshow came up, she reached out and was like, listen, I'm in. I would love to do it. DJ Qualls, who I think really just made that episode. You know, I had Bruce Davison and I were talking about Willard when we were on set. So I felt really fortunate that all of these actors were willing to come down. You know, and a lot of the other folks that were in the show, some of them had been on The Walking Dead. You know, so I had worked with a lot of them in some capacity. So when they came and they auditioned, the nice thing is there's a lot of really super talented actors in Atlanta, and I would watch the audition tapes and be like, hey, I killed him. He was one of the people that would carve W's. Jesse, I killed him. I killed that guy. So it was kind of fun to be able to see a lot of people that I had worked with. But, you know, listen, at one point I had spoken to, you know, Simon Pegg and Josh Brolin and Aaron Paul, and, you know, there were a lot of cool people that were like, listen, if I wasn't shooting this thing called The Avengers, I would be there. I'm like, oh yeah.
Sometimes there's some Marvel conflicts.
Yes, you know, the biggest movie series franchise in history versus Creepshow. Yeah.
I don't know. They're both cool to me. We're going to go back to fan questions in a couple minutes. So if you have one, if you want to do video one, hit the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. If you have a text question, hit the question mark. Also, we know some people are watching over on YouTube. If you want to join us here to ask a question of Greg, you can do that by going to Shindig. There should be a link in the description, I believe, for you to go there. I wanted to mention, Greg, you know, we have a Fandom Creepshow wiki, and actually this story, Gray Matter, is one of the most popular ones, most of the frequently clicked on ones. As you mentioned, you knew you wanted to have a Stephen King story. There was some back and forth on which it would be, but did you always know you needed to begin this show with the Stephen King story, just given the history of it all?
Well, you know, the plan was, you know, like I had said earlier, being able to work with a lot of veterans and a lot of sort of, I don't want to say up and coming, because most of our writers are very well established. But the idea of starting with a Stephen King story and ending with a Joe Hill story was super exciting. It was really exciting to us because, you know, I've read all of Joe's stuff. I loved Horns. I loved Heart-Shaped Box. You know, Nosferatu, The Fireman, like everything that Joe's written, I've read. So for us to be able to kick off with a Stephen King story and then wrap up with a Joe Hill story was really, you know, it was fun. The Rubik's Cube of like pairing episodes together was very interesting, because we were trying to, you know, say, oh, well, this one's got a sort of this kind of tone, so maybe we should pair this episode. You know, putting House of the Head and Gray Matter together for the first episode, I felt like those two probably, you know, not only were they different in tone, but when you deal with the idea that Gray Matter really is a story about alcoholism and codependency. You know, it's like this kid has literally provided food for his father, who was an alcoholic, and, you know, he ends, you know, and Christopher did an amazing job. Jesse did a great job of, well, he's my daddy and I love him, and like, how else would you have expected me to handle this situation? I really, I've had so much experience on The Walking Dead of making sure that the emotion is there. And with that story, the emotion was there, and I was really grateful for that. So intercutting him and Adrian with Tobin and Giancarlo really just sort of built that drama. And then you go right into, the unbelievably talented Kaylee Fleming, and she carries House of the Head by herself. I mean, it's her story. And like I said about The Finger being the first short story that I read, Kaylee was the first actor that we hired. When we were shooting The Walking Dead finale, the snow episode, and I was on set with her and her mom, Misty, and I said, hey, I might be doing the show Creepshow, and there's a part in it that's perfect for you, and I would really be honored. And she's like, okay, that sounds great. And I remember everybody looking at me going, where did you find this girl? She's just, you look at her face and it's like you can see into her brain. You can see every amount of emotion that she's expressing instantaneously. And I felt really lucky that we had her. It was really funny because, the Creepshow's airing on AMC right now on Monday nights.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey Dean Morgan sent me a video of his son, Gus, like sitting like this for about 30 seconds. And I'm like, what is he showing me? And then he pans over to the TV and it was House of the Head. And Gus was watching House of the Head, and Jeffrey was filming him watching it and then panned over to the TV. Made me so proud. I was so proud and so happy.
That's awesome. That's a great story, by the way. The house that I love that and that she is an amazing actress.
Yeah, she really is.
Want to go to another fan question. We have a video question from Nicole. So let's bring up Nicole. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going for you today? Oh, we got two people, not just Nicole. Hey. How's it going?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
We're huge fans of the Creep Show. Well, Walking Dead and the Creep Show. My husband and I were noticing. Actually, I'll let him ask the question.
I can't remember the episode, but my wife and I noticed Pazuzu made an appearance, or kind of like an Easter egg, on one of the. We saw that, and I was like, "Oh man, that's so cool." I have more of a. It's not a question or comment, but I wanted to say that it's really cool to see Creepshow back. As a kid watching Creepshow, growing up like at the drive-in with my folks and stuff like that, but to see it back on television, it's awesome.
Well, listen, thanks. You could tell, and thank you for noticing that. That was in Skin Crawlers, which I think is the episode with Dana Gould, where if you swallow this. If you let this creature suck all the fat out of you, and then it makes you whatever. But there's so many Easter eggs in that show, and I did it on Walking Dead a lot. On Walking Dead, I would put tribute zombies in there. We haven't done Tarman yet, which I'm thinking, we got to do Tarman one of these days for Walking Dead. But we've done every zombies from Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Shaun of the Dead. So with Creepshow, I felt that it was important to continue that tradition. Easter eggs are put in there as a thank you to the fans. Thank you for watching. And if you're an eagle-eyed viewer, you will notice, like, especially even in Gray Matter, the Stephen King story, there's so many Stephen King tributes in there. Like even when Richie, when Richie's son comes in to the diner, he's wearing a yellow slicker from It. The newspaper has the Grady twins from The Shining, and there's so many little things in there. And I put them in there, and Lucas Gottfried, our prop master, and a lot of us, we really worked hard at making sure that the fans saw that, because it was in there for you guys.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's awesome. We love it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
I like that we have dueling ceiling fans.
I know. I feel like I need one. I'm sorry that I don't have one. So let me ask you. You mentioned that Maggie, of course, is coming back to Walking Dead. People are very excited about that. What's it like for you guys to welcome Lauren back? She's not from the original season, but she goes pretty far back with the show. Yeah, so is it pretty cool to get that part of the family back?
It was amazing. Anytime any of our actors come back, even when Michael Cudlitz would come down and direct, it was just, you can never really express what it's like to go through The Walking Dead together as this crazy family. So the day that Lauren shot with us, she came back, and I think she shot a couple days for the finale. It was weird because I got to the set early and I went and sat in her trailer and we talked for a little bit, and it was adorable because she was a little nervous. And I was a little jittery and excited, and she's a great actress. She taught me a lot about directing. I will say she's super intuitive, like all the other actors, like Stephen Yeun and Norman and all of our actors. They're so good. But with Lauren, her and I went back to season 2 together, and I had worked with her a lot. So it was kind of, I think we were both had this nervous excitement about getting a chance to film again. Mm-hmm. And after we had shot the first scene, it was kind of like no time had passed. It was the same when Scott Wilson came down to shoot. None of us even knew he was sick at the time. He told me maybe 2 weeks later that he was sick, and I was, he was we spent so much time together, working together. And again, he made me a better director. I remember directing a scene in season 3 with him and Michael Rooker. And then another scene with him and with Stephen Yeun, where I shot the scene where with Herschel's watch, where Glenn goes in season 2 to get the watch from Herschel and ask for Maggie's hand in marriage. And there were times when I would let the camera continue to roll because I thought that the actors had something a little more that they might want to try. I wanted to really create an environment for the actors. And there was one scene that I shot with Stephen and Scott Wilson, and so much came out of just this last 30 seconds in the scene. And even Denai had said at one point, in the middle of season 4, when they all get separated and Denai's walking, she creates the new pets. And she has this moment of revelation and she kills all the zombies in the field. I saw an interview recently where she talked to Entertainment Weekly, and she said that was one of her favorite moments in the series because, visual effects was well, we're not really sure how much money we have to film every single kill. But when Denai was doing it, I didn't say cut. I kept going because there was so much emotion building into it. And she wasn't sure if we were going to stop or not. But when I didn't stop, she kept going, and she ended up killing 24 extras in one take. And the emotion behind it, it allowed her to get to this really specific place. So I had the same experiences with Lauren. These actors are so good. And what's great about The Walking Dead as a whole is we make each other better. And after so many years, the shorthand that I have with Norman and the shorthand that I have with Melissa, it really, it really is something that you can't really ever express because you have to kind of be there. But, it's so much fun for, like you said earlier, to go back and revisit some of those scenes and some stuff that we had done in the past. And I'm so grateful to still be on the show and be a part of it.
Anything you can tease about Maggie's state of mind when we see her again, since it's been a while?
Maggie's in an interesting place because she has been gone for a little while. I think we were thinking that she had been potentially gone for about a year. And, you find out in the beginning of season 10 that there were letters that were being written back and forth between Maggie and Carol and, the different communities. So when Maggie reads one of these letters and realizes what has been happening to her friends in their community, that sort of activates her. So I think, and we'll get into a little bit more of what's going on with Maggie as her story progresses. But
yeah. Gotcha. We have another question here, a text question from Allie. So let's bring up Allie's question. How do you balance fan expectation from the comics and subverting them to create tension? Do you ever fear fan blowback? And this, I guess, kind of goes back to what you were talking about with Negan. Like, how do you decide what needs to match the comics versus where it's the right place to kind of maybe go on a tangent?
Well, listen, our fans are what make the show, and we've been very, very, we embrace that fandom. Comic-Cons, going to Comic-Cons, and the people that love the show, the fans have a voice and they're very passionate about the show. And, listen, the episode with where Glenn and Abraham were killed, like I was just not looking forward to that moment. I remember in the comic book, that moment screwed me up. Like I was just heartbroken. I was sitting next to Steven at a table doing press for Comic-Con 2 years earlier, and I opened the comic book and saw that horrible drawing of Glenn's eye hanging out, and he's screaming Maggie's name. And I remember just feeling how senseless it was. And listen, I mean, think about Laurie's death in the comic book. I mean, Laurie is holding Judith when the governor attacks the prison and kills both of them. So there are times when you have to manage, future storylines and storytelling. And then there are other times when it's important to stay true to the source material. So, Negan's introduction, we had to, it was very important to the showrunner and to the writers that we maintain, part of that introduction of that character. And, trust me, I think Jeffrey would be like, hey, listen, if Negan doesn't talk so much, that's fine with me, because he had 12 pages of dialogue that we had to film in one night. We shot that scene over 2 nights. But, there are times when, listen, everybody reacts differently. I mean, I know there were certain sequences when characters were killed off that weren't killed off in the comic book. I don't necessarily have a ton to do with a lot of that. I certainly read outlines and I certainly read scripts. And when the showrunners pitched the story arc, there were times when I didn't love the idea of it, but I saw what the reason for it. There's a reason behind everything. The fans may not understand what the intent is, or they may not like it. But unfortunately, there are situations where, characters are set up, and that was the intent, was they're going to be here for this amount of time and then they're going to go away. But, the cast continues to evolve and change. And the good news is, for most of the actors on our show that have been killed off, then they become, the commander of a starship. You look at Sonequa, or they become the Punisher, or, the actors have gone on to do some unbelievable things. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of, Michael Cudlitz has been directing on Walking Dead and The World Beyond. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of these characters that the actors that have been killed off, they've gone on to some amazing things. So as sad as it is to see them go, and trust me, there were, saying goodbye to Chandler and saying goodbye to Andy and saying goodbye to Scott Wilson and saying goodbye to Sonequa. And it's heartbreaking because we're all in the trenches together, and it's never easy. Alana Masterson, who I adore and has become like one of my best friends, like I miss seeing them, but then I think, wait a minute, they're still alive. I can like drive down into Hollywood and visit.
Right. you've worked on so many great horror projects, and a lot of them are sort of, considered cult classics. And I remember being on the set of the pilot for Walking Dead. The first time I interviewed you for Walking Dead, we were standing a few feet away from Bicycle Girl being filmed.
Yep,
against the wall.
I remember.
Who could have guessed? Is it still strange for you 10 years later that the show didn't just become a hit? It became sort of this mainstream, one of the biggest shows on TV hit. Is it sort of a strange alchemy that you never can tell, like when something's going to hit to the extent this did?
Well, listen, what's funny about that is when, I was a fan of the comic books. I mean, anything zombie related, I love. So when I read the comic book, I was a huge fan of it. I was filming with Robert Rodriguez, and I was in Austin, went to a comic book shop and found the Walking Dead comics. Then I started talking to Frank Darabont about it. And Frank, this was before I think he had even gotten the rights. He had said, I always wanted to do a zombie story, a zombie movie, but, I just needed to find the right survival story. So when Walking Dead came about, Frank, who is absolutely amazing at putting these ensemble troops together, and he put the Walking Dead together by finding Andy Lincoln and Sarah Callies and John Bernthal and writing Daryl Dixon's character, because Daryl Dixon isn't in the comic book. So Frank found in The Walking Dead the perfect survival story. And listen, the fact that we've told, I don't even know how many episodes we've shot at this point, 130 or 140 maybe. Mm-hmm. The fact that we have a continuing story, you could have never done it any other way. You couldn't have done The Walking Dead as a 2-hour movie. It had to be a TV show out of the gate, because you fell in love with these characters. Season 2, which a lot of people really, it's a much maligned season, which I still don't understand, because I think the storytelling, the character development, everything that we did in season 2 is what made you fall in love with Rick and Daryl and Carol and Glenn and Maggie and Carl. You wouldn't have been able to do it if you hadn't set the stage for creating and teaching us who these people were. Mm-hmm. So I feel like having the ability to learn about these characters over 100 and so hours is what makes the show powerful. And you had never had a zombie show before. You had never had, you'd always had a 2-hour movie. So, Dawn of the Dead, which was 2 hours and 20 minutes. And even, I wouldn't necessarily call 28 Days Later a zombie movie, because it's an infection movie personally, right. But that's me. But, even, Resident Evil. And the one thing I want to throw in there real quick is that a lot of people say, well, what do you attribute the success of the zombie genre to? And I first and foremost, you got to have good characters and a good story. But second of all, the invention of the third-person shooter game introduced the zombie genre to a younger audience. So being able to, between Resident Evil and House of the Dead, when you had a lot of people that could play games where they would shoot zombies, and then all of a sudden you have the Dawn of the Dead remake, you have Land of the Dead, you have 28 Days Later, you have all this zombie material. I think a tremendous amount had to do with the advent of the third-person shooter game. And I said that to George, because George Romero had said to me, listen, man, at one point I was the only kid in that sandbox. That was my sandbox, and I was the only kid there. And I know, a lot of people like, well, how do you feel about Walking Dead? And he was like, well, that's their story. I have my universe and they have their universe, and it's okay. They don't need to, he was very protective, rightfully so, about his world. And I had said to him, well, what do you think about, the advent of the video games? Because video games, I really feel like, took the zombie genre from guys who were fans of, and girls, fans of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, and it made it accessible to a younger audience. And that was critical to the success of The Walking Dead.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Greg, I want to thank you so much for your time today. The Walking Dead season 10 finale is coming at some point. I'm
trying to find out myself. Trust me, I ask anybody know when it's going to air? Because I want to see it.
But in the meantime, Creepshow season 1, it's been airing on AMC on Monday nights, like you mentioned, and it will be on Blu-ray and DVD on June 2nd. Love the show, and I can't wait for season 2 of that as well. So thank you again, Greg. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. This was super fun. Let's do it again. I'm available tomorrow, 12 to... No.
We'll give you a couple weeks. Thank you so much again, Greg. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Want to again thank Greg for his time. Remind you, Creepshow season 1's on Blu-ray and DVD on June 2nd. We also want to once again mention our charity partner, Direct Relief for Hey Fandom. They are a wonderful organization. We would like to encourage you to donate if you can at fandom.link/donate. That's it for this time, guys. Thanks again. Thanks to you. Thanks to Greg. We'll be back soon with another Hey Fandom. Take care.